So this is your recap of Paul's apocalyptic worldview. Again, he said that we all exist in a present evil age in which sin and death are running the show. But what Christ has done through his death and resurrection is to defeat sin and death. And all that we need to do to be a part of that new reality that Christ has created is to believe or to have faith or to trust that Christ has done this thing. And when we do that, we are brought into this new reality in which sin and death are defeated. We are marked out by the Spirit, we're made right, and Christ is being formed in us. So what is the big deal? Why would it be a problem to move from saying, okay, I have faith, but then I got circumcised too? What's the big deal? Paul says it's a very big deal. And he creates that argument in chapter 4, verses 8 and following. He says, formerly, when you didn't know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not God's. But now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you're turning back to those weak and miserable principles? So when you were the person on the outside of this bubble, you were run by sin and death. Those were the things that animated you. And out here in this realm, run by sin and death, there were things that were a part of this. And Paul refers to them, and here I've got miserable principles. I don't know what your translation will say, but we'll put miserable principles, or yeah, I think I'm going to put elemental spirits, because I think that's closer to what the Greek says. So Paul says, out here, you were run by sin and death and these kind of elemental spirits, these miserable things that you put on and that you tried maybe to try to gain righteousness. And he says to them, after he's talking about these miserable principles, he says, do you wish to be enslaved by those miserable principles all over again? Because those miserable principles are on the outside. They are out here in the realm of sin and death in the present evil age. He says, you're observing special days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that somehow I've wasted my efforts on you. So Paul says, once you've had faith in Christ, you've done everything that you need to do. There's nothing else left. In fact, if you try to put on circumcision or Jewish law, then you're reaching back into the present evil age, and you're trying to lay hold of those elemental spirits that used to be a part of your life that are no longer needed, that God has done away with, and in fact given you God's very own Spirit. One of the analogies that I often make is that, let's say that you don't know it, but you've been bitten by a very poisonous snake, right? So this snake is so poisonous, and the snake is like sin and death in this analogy. So you've been bitten by the snake, it's very poisonous, you don't know it though, and then somebody arrives and says, hey, I've got the anti-venom to your snake bite. And you're like, what snake bite? And then you look down and you see that your leg's like all blown up like a balloon. And you're like, oh my gosh, the snake bite. I need the anti-venom. And somebody gives you the anti-venom and then leaves. And then you're like, you say to yourself, that's great. I've been, made right by the anti-venom. But just in case, I think I'd like my friend to try to suck out the venom, even though you've already been healed. And Paul's like, no, you don't need to do that. That's an extra thing. In fact, that could be really bad because it could lead to an infection or something like that. And so trying to go back to the elemental spirits and to gain circumcision to Paul is like having your friend try to suck out the venom in your leg after you've received the anti-venom and been healed. It's nonsense. And it could be harmful. And so he doesn't want you reaching back into the realm of sin and death. The next stage in this whole apocalyptic worldview that we have is, in fact, something that we've already discussed. I think I have to stop doing that. Okay. Something that we've already discussed, and that is, I'm a failure. Well, I'll write it on here with the annotation stuff. So what we've discussed in First Thessalonians is that the present evil age does not last forever. This new reality that's created by Jesus' death and resurrection actually wins the day, right? And what it ushers in is the age to come. So I am going to pause here, and then we'll discuss the age to come in just a minute. If I can make it work. I think my computer is frozen. I don't know what to do. I think I got it back. Ignore all that bit. Okay, so what we have here, thank goodness I got this back. Okay, so what we talked about in First Thessalonians was the age to come, that Jesus is coming back, that the parousia is going to happen, and when that happens, sin and death will be defeated once and for all, and they will no longer reign. And that's an exciting reality. And so the end game of Paul's whole apocalyptic worldview, that's supposed to be Jesus, is that Jesus is coming back. And in the age to come, this reality that Christ has created through Christ's death and resurrection will actually cover everything. So the present evil age will disappear, and those elemental spirits will be done with, and all will be marked out by the defeat of sin and death, which is an exciting thing. One of the things that Paul does is that he appears to, in his conversion to being a Christ follower, he appears to have moved from noting that the solution is the death and resurrection of Jesus. So he sees, oh my gosh, that's the solution to the problem. And he looks at that solution and he says to him, and he looks to the problem. So he goes in that order. He sees the solution as Christ's death and resurrection, and he's like, oh my gosh, the problem is much bigger than I ever thought. And so he moves in this direction of saying, wow, I thought that the solution was following the law when I was a Jew. I mean, he's still kind of a Jew. So when he was living out his Jewish lifestyle, he thought following the law and being as righteous, following it equals righteousness. But then he saw that the actual solution, the bigger solution, was the death and resurrection of Jesus. And he said, oh my gosh, the problem of sin and death are much bigger than I thought. Much more costly to fix these problems than I thought it was. And that moves him along this path of saying the law was good while it lasted, but the real solution to this thing is found in the death and resurrection of Jesus. So those are all things that need to be working in your mind as you look at Galatians, and then later as we look at Romans as well. That Paul looks at the solution of Jesus Christ, death and resurrection, and he says, my gosh, the law could not fix that. The law was not a big enough solution to this problem. I thought that the problem was X, when really it was like X, big X. Yeah. All right. Let's see if I can actually stop the recording now. I can't. I'm a failure. No, spinning. maybe if I do this.